Good evening. Greetings of peace and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I do want to thank everyone here this evening, but I do also want to acknowledge a couple of people, a couple of guests, and I'm sure I'm not going to do justice because I'm sure I'm going to forget a couple of other people, but two that stand out is Dr. Carolyn Stewart. She is right on this table. She is from the governor's office, and she's a director of the Minority Affairs. We're certainly fortunate and honored to have her be here. Next to her left, is her son, also Dr. Stewart, and he is the Associate Provost and Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs at West Virginia State University. Thank you also for being here. We have folks from Huntington, Sylvia. Dr. Sylvia is from Huntington. We're glad that you're here with us. And we also have a very special friend all the way from DC. We have Maliha Latif and Farhad Chowdhury. Chowdhury, however, you know, he's they both are good friends, and they drove from DC to be here with us this evening. Thank you for your commitment and your dedication. Unfortunately, Dr. Saud Ashraf, who is dear to all of us, was not able to attend our event. He was planning on coming last Saturday, but due to other circumstances and prior engagement, he was not able to be with us, but he certainly sends his best to every single one of you. Having said that, please, since we are starting the evening, your cell phones, either on vibrate. Thank you, Luay. Luay immediately took action, a role model. Either on vibrate, silent, and if you do take a call, yes, we can hear you. So do take the call upstairs, please. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker this evening. He is someone that I have met a couple of times in the last couple of years at a couple of events in DC. Struck me as a person of character and a person of ethic. And you will see why in a second when I introduce him. Obviously, his introduction is fairly lengthy, so I'm going to do maybe a short version of that, but I think it gives you a bit of flavor. So, Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool is a distinguished scholar in residence at Georgetown University's Edmund A. Walsh School for Foreign Service. He also works in the Al-Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. He is the founder of the World for All Foundation that endeavors to create a world of coexistence and that is safe for difference. Ambassador Rasool has recently completed a term of duty as the South African ambassador to the United States. In his career, he held several positions, including a member of parliament in South Africa's National Assembly. For all of his contributions to South Africa, Ambassador Rasool has been a recipient of countless awards, including the Nelson Mandela Award for Health and Human Rights. He has a long history of involvement in the anti-apartheid struggle, even as young as a high school. During that journey, he has sacrificed many, including spending time in prison by the apartheid government, and that's where he first met Nelson Mandela for the first time in 1987. He was a founder of the Call of Islam, an anti-apartheid Muslim organization that transformed Muslims' approach in South Africa towards democracy, human rights, gender equality, and relations with people of other faith, ideologies, and cultures. If that's not enough, he writes. He has contributed a chapter to a book, and there's a book in the making and many others. We're honored to have you, and with that, please give him a good West Virginia welcome.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. My gracious host, Ali Isa, and the founders and leaders of Cafe Al-Fiqh, our respected and revered ulama who are present, Imam Asal and Sheikh Mustafa, and all the leaders of faith who are with us, our host at this university and his mother who is from the office of the governor, my respected elders, my dear brothers and sisters, friends, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you and good evening to all of you. I must say that this is a wonderful sight to be in this unique university, standing next to the river and looking across at the capital, and doing so with a group of people, mostly Muslims, who could have done so many other things on a night like this. It speaks, I think, about a community that is well led, that is well grounded, and who are trying to sort out through conversation, through discussion, through the application of thought, what is our place in the world and how do we make this contribution from this state called West Virginia and from this city called Charleston. I must say that I come from a country that has been for much of its existence an unfortunate country. We have had the full evils of colonialism, of segregation, and of apartheid. And we may be guilty of having internalized our adversity, our suffering so much that I have difficulty believing that people rise to their better selves when they are in conditions of comfort. Sometimes when we are tested are the times when we grow. But we must allow ourselves to be growing when we are tested. And so many of you are part of this American community, this American nation, having found your way here from your own adversities. Many of you carry the scars of your backgrounds and of your histories. Many of you have come here and you discover that the battle just continues even if it is in different forms. And many of you are here and feel that the comforts that you may have achieved here amidst challenges, you never feel comfortable with it enough because you know so many who are left behind in conditions of war, of conflict, of poverty, and of difficulty. But the challenge to us is often not what we do in trying to denounce the comforts and trying to create battles and struggles here to show that we are still in difficulty like our brothers and sisters that we left behind in the war-torn areas of the world, unfortunately mostly Muslim areas. We are not here by accident. We have been placed here, and in West Virginia, we have been placed in the ear of the superpower. And therefore, we need to do something differently. We need to be able to shape the conditions rather than be shaped by the conditions in which we find ourselves. The examples we set, the lives we live, the character we shape of ourselves are going to be the loudest advocacy that we can do on behalf of all of those who still struggle. We must be able to hold out a vision of what is who we are, what is a Muslim, what is Islam here for our neighbors in the American society. And we must at the same time hold up for our brothers and sisters in those conflict-ridden areas. We must hold out an example that when we are able to live democratically, to embrace human rights, to embrace gender equality, to live with integrity with the environment, and be able to just live a life of choice, that is the vision that they are capable of, because that is the image of God at work and at play and able to shape this new reality for this world that we come from. That's our job. I have been fortunate, as Ali has said, in my most difficult conditions, when I spent time in prison, much of it in solitary confinement, and when I came out of there, I had the privilege of meeting Nelson Mandela, and all the interrogations and all the solitary confinement and all the time in prison could not erase the one good moment that I had, that I will never exchange 10 years of freedom for, to have met someone that I believed was a game changer, a beacon of hope in a miserable situation. Bertolt Brecht in his play Galileo says, unhappy is the land that needs a hero. Meaning that it is in conditions of unhappiness that heroes are made. Heroes don't come where there is just happiness. That's often the breeding ground for complacency, for human beings to abdicate, to lose responsibility. It is in unhappy conditions that we are tested and where heroism emerges. Heroism, in Quranic terms, is nothing but khilafatullah fil ard. Representatives, vicegerents, deputies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, agents of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth. And so, this Nelson Mandela in 1964 stood in a courtroom in South Africa between a death penalty by hanging or a life sentence on Robben Island. And he stood facing the judge. And in his final statement, he said to the judge, I have cherished the ideal of a free and democratic South Africa where all human beings live with equal dignity and with a better chance for life. He continued by saying, it is an ideal for which I want to live and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. And he challenged the judge with that last bit to make him a martyr. And the judge understood it and instead gave him the death penalty. Instead gave him a life sentence on Robben Island, because he knew that if he made Nelson Mandela a martyr, that things would get out of control in South Africa. But Nelson Mandela could have chosen the glorious death, could have chosen that martyrdom, but he understood something very profound, that when you have an ideal, when you have a set of values, when you have an objective, when you have a destination that is so great that human beings must have, they must taste this promised land, they must live under these values, they must reach that destination, then your primary responsibility is to live for your ideals and to achieve it. If needs be, you may have to die for it. But if it is so valuable, you've got to achieve it and you've got to live for it, even if there are 27 years of jail in store for you. Because even in jail, you've got to embody the dignity that you want for people. You've got to embody the equality, never being subjected by those who put you in that prison. You've got to exercise your choice that they deny you in the political life and your social life. And so the lesson that Nelson Mandela teaches all of us in that moment is that it is important for you to find within your soul that which is so precious and so worthy, that you are even prepared to die for it. Because once you have gazed into your soul so profoundly and found it, then you know what you must live for. And so many of us live our lives without ever having looked into the depths of our soul to find that worthy thing. And that's the challenge. Once you've got that sorted out, it is one of the most transformative moments in your life, because you now have found your purpose and you now have found what your true north is, your moral center. And once you've done that, you have transformed yourself from being a victim of history, a victim of circumstances, a victim of your oppressors, a victim of those who don't like you, a victim of those who are prejudiced against you, a victim of those who try to denigrate you, insult you, and do whatever they want to. The moment you have found your purpose from the depths of your soul, you have transformed yourself from being a victim to being an agent. Khilafatullah fil ard. The agent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth. The instrument of God. Because victims can never plan ahead. They wallow in the past. Victims can never imagine a future. They can only recreate the hurts and the injuries of the past. Victims never look through the windscreen. They always drive from the rear view mirror. And therefore, the greatest tragedy of the world today is that we have, instead of wholesome debates and conversations about the future, about reimagining ourselves, what we have instead is a competition for victimhood. Who is the greatest victim of history? Who got more hurt here? Who suffered more there? What was greater tragedy there? Who had the worst genocide? Who had this? And it is the conversation of victimhood. Whereas if we accept, by definition, for example, that we are Muslim, you accept the responsibility that God has placed on you to be an agent in this world and not the victim of whoever has your number. And that has to be the most transformative thing that the world requires today. Because we live in this world where globalization is a double-edged sword. We have never had so much wealth in the world, but we've never had so much inequality and poverty in the world. We have never had so much knowledge and information in the world, but we've also never had so much at the expense of faith and culture. We have never had so much mobility in this world. Money and goods can move at the push of a button, but when people are mobile, we become fearful, we become vengeful, we become spiteful, because we welcome the wealth that moves, but we don't welcome the people that move. Globalization can't be something where you want mobility for something and immobility for people. And so ironically, 5 generations ago, 4 generations ago, 3 generations ago, our parents and grandparents may not have known what an African looks like, except maybe if they saw a picture. They may not have known what a Scandinavian looks like. They may not have known what someone from Brazil looks like. Today, those people are all over. But instead of creating a world of familiarity, a world of embracing, a world of outreach, a world of acceptance, what we have created instead is a world of otherness. A world where the other is a threat. A world where the other's religion threatens our beliefs. And so, what do we do as we move forward in this kind of world that we are in today? because it is against the purpose of God. Because in the divine scheme, when people come to know one another, then the world is safe for difference. Illa lita'arafu, that we have been created in diversity so that lita'arafu, so that we may come to know one another. And it doesn't help if some of us are shy to introduce ourselves to the other, because we are almost as guilty as those who fear us when we isolate ourselves from them and don't introduce who we are, what we believe, and how we live. When we put so many barriers between us and them, oh, I can't, my neighbors invited me and I can't go really, and we lose the chance for ta'arafu, for getting to know, because we are thinking, oh, will they serve bacon and all of those kind of things and so forth, rather than opening up a conversation, as we did in South Africa, about diets. Now, every chicken almost that is slaughtered in South Africa is slaughtered by halal methodology, because they've discovered that there's nothing magical about it, but there's something divine about it. But the conversation, so that we can eat together, has been a wholesome one that we have been able to engage in. So we are sitting with our phobias, and they are sitting with their phobias, and we are missing the point of lita'arafu, that we may come to know one another. And so the victims keep apart. Agents will take initiative. And that is the beauty of what you do here in Charleston, West Virginia, is that you have decided that we have something that we need to be discussing, and that we need to reach out, that we mustn't fear the other. And that, I think, is absolutely the purpose of why we need to be able to not only market this better, but to give a recipe for how it can be done, so that others may learn about it. Otherwise, we will all be the victims of one phobia or the other. In this age, we have created more isms and more phobias in an age where we see more of each other, but we fear more of each other. And so, my respected brothers and sisters, the starting point is to overcome this victimhood and to become agents for change, agents for something better. It's to take our place in this world that we are in. The strength of a Nelson Mandela was because he knew within himself what was right, what was worthy, what was valuable, and what was precious. He had his GPS set on a future. And so when he said to his fellow leaders of the liberation movement, we must negotiate, all of them disagreed with him. And he said, you have elected me as a leader, so let me lead. This is the right thing to do, even though it may not be popular now. So leadership is not about doing an opinion survey, finding out what everyone thinks and then doing what everyone wants you to do. It is about doing what is right. That's the first important point. It's doing always what is right. It is not pandering to populism. It is setting an ethical benchmark that you are always able to follow. It is never seeing the other as, in non-human terms, as a caricature, as a cartoon character, but understanding that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, when God tells us in the Quran, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحٍ, I have blown of my spirit into human beings, then never mind how hateful that person may be towards us. We must detest what they do without disrespecting who they are. Because part of who they are is an ingredient that comes from the soul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from God Himself. And those are the ways in which Nelson Mandela was not capable even of seeing whites as whites, but seeing them as much victims of their own propaganda, their own hatred, and understanding that in freeing us, we also free them. And so He offered them not the choice for survival, but He offered them the ability to become human again. And that's what we do. We offer the ability for all of us to remove ourselves from a situation of dehumanization and to discover our own humanity. And that's when reconciliation becomes possible. And finally, there are two things that are so elusive that we miss in this world today. The one is justice, the other is peace. But the two are not opposites. Sometimes we must find the intersection between the two, because sometimes if we strive too hard for justice, it's a never-ending battle and we will never know peace. But sometimes, as the Syrians have taught us today, if you grab too easily for peace, you may sacrifice some justice. So it's not an either or, justice or peace. It's not a sequencing, first justice, then peace, or first peace, then justice. It is finding the right balance, the right proportion between the two. And as Nelson Mandela discovered in South Africa, the intersection between justice and peace is sometimes to build a foundation of reconciliation, the possibility of reconciliation, so that we have just enough to talk about, so that when you see that I am not the enemy, and I see that you are not permanently my enemy, that we have just enough glue between us that holds us together, so that we may find enough peace to pursue justice and enough justice to have a sustainable peace. And those are the things that we need to be able to think about, so that one, we can apply it here where we are, American Muslims, and two, we can hold a vision to our brothers and sisters, our comrades and friends who are still back home struggling age-old fights, and hold up the vision of a world that can be better, a world in which we can live in peace with ourselves and with our neighbors, that we can be who we are and be something else as well. We don't have to choose one identity. In South Africa, the Muslim community said, we are Muslims. And then we said, Muslim will be the noun. And then we said, we will be South African Muslims. And South Africa became the adjective to it. And then we said, we are South African Muslims of Malay origin, or of Indian origin, or indigenous origin. And so we enjoyed our foods and everything that we brought and the cultures. And then we even said, and you can say, you are American Muslims of this origin, that origin, and if the Redskins change the name, then you can even support them. So those are really the challenges of living a life which is safe for difference. And the initiative may sometimes have to come from us. We can't wait till we have overcome our victimhood. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all and really reward you for this example that you set on a Friday night or a Saturday night, whenever you do it, in reaching out. I came here fully expecting only coffee, but the meal has been wonderful because the name is misleading. But I'm hoping, inshallah, that from you will become an example that will reverberate across the world. And so you have the duty not to keep your good deeds to yourself, but to amplify it, not to boast, but because you are finding a template that the Muslim world requires so desperately. And when we glimpse that template, we must spread it. Wallahu a'lam, wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rasul. Jazakallah khair. Does anyone have a question for our guest speaker before? Okay, so we have our Imam has a question.
Jazakumullah khairan, and thank you so much for this really inspiring words and beautiful lecture. I really related to many things that you've been mentioning, and one of the questions that came to my mind, there must have been something coming from your Islamic upbringing and Islamic studies back then that made you meet on grounds with Nelson Mandela. So if you want to share with us some of these values and ideals that you learned from Islam that made you meet with him and made you like have similar ideals and similar values. What are these values and ideals that brought you close to such a great person? And the other part of the question is, what's your advice in terms of the practical steps that we Muslims in Charleston would do to reach the goal that you set tonight? Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. When I saw the Imam raise his hand, I was very afraid because I'm just trying my luck here. And as the fiqh principle is, when there is water, then tayammum is batil. So let me say that the Muslim community of Cape Town came to South Africa about 300 years ago, 350 years ago now, against their will. They were political exiles in Java, Indonesia, and later they were brought as slaves to Cape Town. For 1.5 centuries, Islam was a banned religion. If you were caught practicing Islam, depending on what you were doing, you could be jailed, your property confiscated, or executed. The first Quran that was in written form in South Africa was written from the memory of a Hufaz, from someone who had memorized the Quran and then wrote it down. And that is still in the oldest mosque in South Africa. You know, Imam Juwayni, one of the classical scholars of Islam, in his book Al-Hayath, writes that if hypothetically, just say for example, the scholarship of Islam, those who wrote the books of fiqh and so forth, if those books were all for some reason to disappear, he felt confident that if you knew the Quran and you knew the Sunnah, the prophetic tradition, that you could reconstruct your practice of Islam from its maqasid, from its objectives and from its intents and from its values. I almost think that that's what happened in South Africa. When we didn't have the books of Imam Shafi and the books of Imam Abu Hanifa and the books of Ibn Taymiyyah and all of those kind of things, there was only 2 questions we asked ourselves throughout the difficult years. What would Allah want us to do here? And if the Prophet was here, what would he tell us to do? And then you could only really imagine good things that you must do, valuable things that you must do. And so I think that what we were able to do is to reconnect with those values. Nelson Mandela, in his book Long Walk to Freedom, writes that when they were on Robben Island, he was once allowed to walk around on Robben Island and then discovered this Muslim-looking structure. And it was the grave of Sheikh Matura, one of the old exiles from Indonesia. And then Nelson Mandela says, I realized that I was not the first prisoner on Robben Island, but the first prisoner was in fact this Muslim sheikh. And then he realized that there were people fighting for freedom long before he was born. And they were Muslim also. And then he speaks about how at moments when he was most depressed about his 27 years in prison, he would go to the qabr. He would go to the grave of Sheikh Matura and just reflect there. It helped a lot that the Muslims who visited also left some biryani behind. And he said that that was where he learned his love for biryani. And so that is the one thing. When Nelson Mandela was released, I had the privilege of taking him from the boat, because the first thing he wanted to do was to visit the oldest masjid in Cape Town on the Friday afternoon for Jumu'ah. Then the night go to the oldest synagogue in Cape Town, and then the Sunday morning go to the church in Soweto. So his first thing was to go to all these different places. And so this relationship grew. It also was that the Muslims of South Africa had followed their instincts for good and for justice. And so everyone knows that Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years. Very few people know that for 26 of the 27 years, in the cell right next to him was Ahmed Kathrada, sentenced along with Nelson Mandela to life in prison. Everyone knows Steve Biko was tortured to death in apartheid's prisons. Very few people know that Imam Abdullah Harun, the Imam of the Claremont Mosque, was similarly tortured to death for his beliefs. And this comes to the practical advice. I'm not saying that you should be tortured to death or anything like that, or be life imprisoned for your beliefs or whatever the case. That's not it. You are very fortunate, alhamdulillah, that is not what the Ummah is asking of you. But the lesson that I think South Africa teaches, why it was that when Nelson Mandela appointed his first cabinet in 1994 after South Africa's freedom, South Africans were surprised that he selected 9 Muslims to be in his cabinet, including the Minister of Constitutional Development, Water Affairs, and the First Minister of Justice. The first Chief Justice he appointed was Justice Ismail Muhammad. Why? Because we had not stood aside when fellow South Africans were being oppressed. We joined them because we realized that the best way to fight Islamophobia was to fight racism against blacks. Sometimes we become obsessed with our own battles and we don't see it as a similar battle that we are fighting for discrimination against us. The source of racism is ignorance and fear, prejudice and discrimination. The source of Islamophobia is ignorance and fear, prejudice and discrimination. The source of anti-Semitism is ignorance and fear, prejudice and discrimination. They all have the same parents. They are brothers and sisters of each other. And therefore you can't choose that I just want to fight the brother called Islamophobia. Because then people don't see you as fighting a credible fight. They see you as fighting for your own interests. Whereas if you show that you had a moral interest, that when Michael Brown is killed in Ferguson, Missouri, that your voice should be as loud as when the Chapel Hill 3 were killed. Because if you don't do that, your bona fides will always be questioned. And that when there's oppression in a Muslim country and there's oppression and there's a genocide in Rwanda, you've got to be against genocides per se and not your own choice of genocides. And so the most important lesson is consistency. What you love for yourself, you must love for others, and what you hate for yourself, you must hate for others. And sometimes it is better to fight others' battles, and then they will fight your battle.
Ambassador Rasool, first let me just say this, that is one of the most beautiful speeches I have heard. This is a speech that should be given to every Muslim community and also to the members of the Republican primary. Really, we are honored. We are honored to listen to you.
I'm taking it out of my heart. That's okay.
We are honored, really honored to listen to your words. Before I get to my question, I just want to tell you that I, for one, I'm fascinated by your country's history, and I followed it from the Boer Wars to the de Klerk areas. I followed it with the sporting isolation, the Basil de Oliveira affair. I followed it to the opening of South Africa, the opening of democracy, to the Rainbow Nation, and it is a fascinating country. And the way the minorities have succeeded there, and Muslims in particular, is absolutely fascinating. My question to you is, on one hand, South Africa has done a superb job of not falling into the trap of Zimbabwe or Uganda. And for that, you people are really to be commended to the furthest extent possible. Yet at the same time, Johannesburg probably is the most scariest city on the planet. So if you could explain to us your successes in not falling into the trap of another Uganda, and also how can we stop some of the violence that is taking place in some of the bigger cities in South Africa? Thank you.
So thank you very much. The question is basically that South Africa has some very unique achievements, that it has chosen not to go the way of, say, Zimbabwe, and with policies and so forth that may be short-sighted. But at the same time, we have deep problems like crime and violence in cities like Johannesburg, and how do I respond to those two? Let me first say very quickly about this primary candidate without getting political about it. I actually think, I don't see Trump as a problem, I see him as an opportunity. I think that in his candidature, he is asking every American to examine who they are, what they stand for, what are their finest values, and were he to be the Republican candidate, I think he could forge a lot more unity in opposition to him of right-thinking people saying, that's not us. But again, it's not going to happen magically. It is going to come when people against Islamophobia connect with Black Lives Matter, and Black Lives Matter connect with other African Americans, the civil rights, and people all come up and say, this election is actually a referendum about our identity and our values, and let's make it such. And that, I think, is maybe an opportunity that is waiting to happen. That's the way in which we forged a South African identity out of the evil of apartheid, although I don't think Trump is at that level at all. About the question about South Africa, there's a massive debate after 20 years in South Africa about whether the leadership of Nelson Mandela may not have led to some of the problems that we are still facing today. My short response to that is that had we not taken those lessons, we would not have a fighting chance in the world. The second thing is that when the Bible says that man shall not live by bread alone, then maybe we've been focusing so much on the bread and butter issues. We've built 5 million houses, we've gotten electricity to 90% of our population, 100% of children who must be in primary school are in primary school, and so forth and so forth. So we've got enormous quantitative gains in South Africa. We've got some of the best laws. I think even our Constitution has learned from the weaknesses of the US Constitution and built on it. We've got socio-economic rights. We say, unlike the US Constitution, we are each other's keepers, and so forth and so forth. So I think we've got some really amazing achievements. But we may have been very good at our political transformation. We may have been really good about our social transformation, about economic transformation, even despite enormous shortcomings. But I think that the one thing that we must learn, and this is really important, it's going to challenge the Palestinians, it's going to challenge the Syrians after this enormous setback that they've had, it's going to challenge Iraq continuously, etc., is that there must be a spiritual transformation as well. We've got to find ways of even doing mass therapy, because you can't have been subjected to such intense level of trauma and violence, and then when Nelson Mandela is elected president, you're suddenly all okay. Because the violence is becoming generational. The trauma has not been removed from the first generation victims, people who faced the tear gas, who saw people being butchered, and became immune to the idea of seeing someone die next to them. It's almost become so every day. that when life doesn't matter to you anymore, then taking life doesn't matter to you. And so we are shocked ourselves that a robbery becomes a violent robbery. Because we have just grown so used to life being cheap. And so we need, in South Africa particularly, ways in which we can remake our relationships. I think that women in South Africa face their own challenges. Because sometimes when you as the man is so emasculated, sometimes the only power you exercise is over your family and your spouse. And so we need, and so every society, before it makes the choice to get deeper into violence, needs to ask itself, how will we extract the violence? How will we remove the gene for violence after 10 years of war, after 5 years of a genocide, after seeing 250,000 people die, after seeing 68 years since the Nakba, etc., etc. How will we reconstitute the soul of our people? And therefore, the Quran is very clear, even when it gives permission to Muslims to fight. It says, but if they incline to peace, then you too incline to peace. Because it knows that you can win a war, but you cannot easily reconstitute a soul. And I think that really are we can answer the question with more police, with wall-to-wall cameras that's going up, but we are increasing the policing, but we are not cutting the source of the inflicted trauma that I think is happening in places like South Africa.
Jazakallah khair. I'm sure there are more questions, but for the sake of time, Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Mr. Rasool. Thank you for the two questions. So the ambassador said what I heard him say a lot of things, but three things that have resonated with me that I'd like to share with you, and I'd like you to reflect on them and see what that reminds you of. First, he said, be an agent of change. Second, I heard him say, rise above victimization. And three, he said, you shape yourself and don't allow others to shape you. Does that sound like a cafe team to you? For those who are smiling and laughing. So we are here this evening, and normally we hold this event in a more private setting for the cafe team and the supporters of the cafe team to celebrate the wins of the previous year and share our successes with them. But as we have mingled with many of our community members and even with some of our local politicians, they said, well, we didn't know of such a nonprofit organization called Cafe Al Fikr and the good work that you are doing. So we thought we'll try it this year, where not only we invite the cafe team and the supporters of the cafe team, is invite other community members as well to hear about the good work that we have done. And to do that, we brought in obviously Ambassador Rasool to be more of the center of attention and to give you an idea about what we aspire to be. So we're celebrating success. And the success of any organization depends on the commitment of its supporters who believe in its mission and values. And man lam yashkur an-nas lam yashkur Allah azza wa jal. So in accordance to the words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, peace be upon him, the one who has not thanked the people has not thanked Allah, God Almighty. So on behalf of the cafe team, we extend our fondest and our heartfelt gratitude to you, to each one of you, to the cafe team, to the volunteers, to the associates, to the donors, and to the advisory committee members who have made 2015 initiatives possible. So I would like to ask the cafe team, the advisory committee members, the associates to stand up so we can acknowledge you and others to recognize you. And don't be shy, please. Come on. Malik, stand up. Who are we missing? Zanabli, stand up, please. So there are some folks who are shy. Thank you. But most importantly, thank you to the families, because without your support to their commitment to the cafe team, we would not be successful. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort. And this is a good opportunity for me to even thank my wife, Stacy. She's a ghost to many. She doesn't get to attend many of our events and many of our social functions we host because we have a couple of young ones at home, and we don't have a babysitter, and they are very active. So that's why we don't take him anywhere. Actually, the 2-year-old, his nickname is Hurricane. And he doesn't have a category yet. He is off the chart, alhamdulillah. So thank you. Without your support and commitment, I would not have the worthy time to give to the cafe team and to the mission of cafe. I walk around the house with a sticky note glued to my forehead that says thank you, because she does a lot to not only our family, but to our friends, our neighbors, our school, our community. She cooks probably to several families every week and delivers food to them and many other things. So again, thank you. You're a remarkable person, and I thank God for having you in my life. So as you know, what we do with Cafe is we pause and reflect. We reflect on a phrase, a subject, a hadith, a narration from any of the prophets, peace be upon them, an ayah, a verse from the Quran, a word. What does it mean? How is it relevant to us from an Islamic perspective? What can we learn from it? What can it inspire us to do good, to take action? So this evening I will ask you to reflect on 3 things along the way. The first reflection is success, because we're talking about a lot of success. From the lens of society, when you look at success, how does success manifest itself to you? Is a physician success? Yes? I hope you say yes, because 90% of you are physicians? Professor? Yes? Somebody who lives in a nice home? Somebody who drives a nice car could manifest itself as successful? What other ways do you see success? Just shout it out. Happiness? Righteousness? How do we look at a success from a Muslim lens? Fawz al-Azim, the grandiose of all wins. More worldly things. Service to God by service to the people. Giving. Let's look at the prophets. Take Prophet Moses alayhi salam. Wasn't he homeless? He escaped Pharaoh, right? So he was homeless. Was Prophet Moses successful? Take Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, peace be upon him. He was kicked out of his house. He was homeless. Was he successful? Pharaoh, lived in a beautiful home, claimed to be the king of all kings, had the latest and the greatest of whatever eye technology back then. Was he successful? No. Take Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Did not read, did not write, no education, refugee. Was he successful? So we as Muslims do not associate success with wealth, and we don't associate failure with poverty, because they all left a legacy. Speaking of legacy, that's a second reflection. We're all going to leave a legacy behind, whether we like it or not. The question is, what's your legacy? So Imam Hassan al-Basri, in a figurative manner, not in a literal sense, to my two imams here, reported to say that the life of dunya is 3 days. Yesterday that vanished with all its history. Tomorrow, you may not see. You have today. Own it and work hard at it. And that's what we strive to do with the Cafe team, is we would like to leave a legacy behind, and we would like to work hard at leaving a good legacy behind. So every year, we think that we work hard, but this past year, we worked extra hard. And every single one of us, by the way, for some of our guests who are not familiar with the Cafe team, this is all volunteer. We're all non-paid. We're all professionals. We all have families, and we all have hobbies and social life. But we do find time to serve our community. So having said that, there are 4 people that actually stood out from the Cafe team that exemplified success, and they're creating their own legacy. So we haven't done this in the past. This is new to us this year. We'd like to acknowledge those, and we'd like to acknowledge them now and not at the end of the program, your conventional way of doing that. As I set up, I would like actually, and this is, I did not prepare the ambassador to do that, but I'd like the ambassador actually to stand up and be with me, because I'd like the ambassador to award them the token of appreciation, if you don't mind. I think it would mean a lot to them if it comes from you versus from the Cafe team. I'd like Anil, the Vice President of Cafe Al Fikr, to stand up with us. And Feroz, who is the Secretary, is also. And then Asad Khan, who is the Chair of the Advisory Committee, to also come and stand with us as we acknowledge our 4 Cafe members. So the first one, the award, it's called Service of Humanity. We would like to recognize and acknowledge Dr. Abdurrahman Zanabli. Hold that, come here with me, hold that thought. I would like to share with the group a little bit about Dr. Abdurrahman Zanabli. So first of all, he came to the state 8 years ago. Nephrologist, built his practice, added a couple of other nephrologists, great 2 nephrologists, opened up several satellite offices, and serving patients in underserved areas. He's an avid supporter of Cafe from day one, and he also serves on the advisory committee and very active member on the advisory committee. More importantly, his commitment, his personal commitment to go above and beyond more than any one of us would expect. His services as a past president of SAMS Foundation, under his leadership, he grew the budget of SAMS from a few $100,000 to $20 million, 2 years, providing humanitarian aid to thousands of Syrian refugees across the world. And because of that, and many others, we would like to honor you with that award, and We wish you continued success.
Thank you very much.
At the end, the banner, the cafe banner is in the back, and we actually would like to take pictures with everybody, so if you would be kind to stick around. For Zanablis family, we do thank you for your support as well. I know Amir is here and his wife is here somewhere. Here she is, Nasreen, so thank you so much. The other three, it's called the Community Leader Awards. Again, these are cafe members, and this is looking from the cafe lens and what they have contributed. The three, and I'll tell you what they have in common, and then I'll mention their names, and unfortunately one of them is not here this evening. The dedication, the commitment, the ability to mobilize others and motivate others to take action, and you know how difficult that is. They hold themselves accountable, and you know how much that is important to me. Their integrity of follow-through and the response to the request without asking or hesitation, without asking any questions or hesitation. Their impact in addressing the needs of their own local community. They exemplified the theme of Cafe last year, which is to rise above the challenges. And most importantly, they all had one thing in common, and they always asked this question: what else can I do, as if it's not enough? And with that, I would like first to ask Mrs. Ruby Abdullah to come up here. You see, this is an example. You should have seen the look on her face. Completely humble, completely unexpected. Your work cannot go unacknowledged. Thank you so much. The other person is Dr. Imad Shamma. Come here, buddy boy. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. You can be seated. I really appreciate that. The third one is Sky Kirshner, who serves on the advisory committee, and Sky is a reverend and a psychologist and the director of KPCC, the Kanawha Pastoral Counseling Service here in town. He has been a valued member of the cafe team, and he is on a ski trip with his family this weekend. So we knew going into 2015 it was going to be a challenging year as American Muslims, because we knew we were dealing with Islamophobia, violence, and sadly to say, more than half of Americans view us unfavorably because we're American Muslims. So in the words of Gandhi, we must become the change we want to see. And when we reflected on that, we decided that, you know, the theme for 2015 should be to rise. Rise above victimization. Rise as American Muslims and set a good, positive example. But rise with confidence and grace and dignity, because sometimes we can rise with uncontrolled emotion that is counterproductive. Rise above limitation and negativity and pessimism and Islamophobic rhetoric. So we kicked off the meeting last year, similar to this, more of a private setting, where we invited Judge Stephanie Thacker. She inspired us with her own life story of someone who was raised in a tiny town of West Virginia, Hamlin, went to college, became an attorney, ultimately was appointed by President Obama as a federal judge to the Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Lifetime appointment. The next seat up is a seat on the Supreme Court. And she was an example of how a person can rise above limitation and restricted circumstances and create her own future. I'm proud to say she is a sister of my wife. Shortly after that, February 10th, 3 young American Muslims were shot and killed in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Horrific crime, allegedly over the parking dispute. We said, when we reflected on that, there's no community that is immune to that, including our community. So what can we do to prepare the community, God forbid, if we are faced with a situation like that? So with the collaboration of the Islamic Center, Rabbi Ureki, also Reverend Hutchins from St. John's Episcopal Church, and also Sky Kirshner, we held a community-based multi-faith town hall meeting to discuss violence in our lives, how to deal with it, how to prepare our community for a time of crisis, how to forge a common response if we're faced with such a challenge. Homeland Security was facilitating discussion. The FBI was there. The police department was there. Mr. Booth Goodwin, at that time, the attorney for the Southern District of West Virginia, was also there on the panel. And by the way, he apologizes for not being here. He was going to be here last Saturday. He has a commitment this evening. And for those of you who do not know, he has resigned as the attorney for the Southern District, and he's running for governor on a Democratic ticket against Kessler and against Cole and Justice on the Republican side. So he wanted to be here to get to know you a little bit better, but inshallah we may host him at a private event later on. What did that result, this meeting, that town hall meeting? I think we all agree that it strengthened our relationships with our community leaders and our spiritual leaders. It enhanced our trust, with them. And then, what a pleasant surprise, Rabbi Ureki, who became very good friends, called me up shortly after that, and he said, "Look, Ali, the Israel-Palestine situation is here to stay, and I'd like to do a joint program with you." He says, "We've never done that before, but I feel that I can do it through the channel of Cafe. Could we make that possible?" So I asked Ibtisam from the Islamic Center to join me on that discussion. And inshallah, God's willing, if it does work out, we will be holding one in the spring. And it's called Painful Hope, where an Israeli Zionist and a Palestinian activist, both are very good friends, are on a tour promoting peace. I said, if they can do it, why can't we in our own community? So stay tuned for that. As we were working as a team for that town hall, we came across also a pleasant surprise. We found out that we don't work well together as a team. Many actually did not want to work as a team. Why is this person leading this initiative? Why is this logo on top of this logo? Why is this word on top of that word? So we got into the weeds and we lost perspective of what we're trying to achieve. So we said, what can we do as a Cafe team to actually rise above? Because when you get in the weeds, you get high and you lose perspective. So why don't we rise above that and do a Cafe forum on leadership? And if you remember, we did one on the V-shape formation. It's when the geese fly south, they fly in a V shape. It's proven that they fly faster, they fly longer distance, more efficiently, more productively. That shared leadership, every goose actually takes a role in that leadership, but it's only when they are ready. And when they are not in a leadership role, they are in a supportive leadership role. There are no egos and no hierarchies in that V-shape formation. So we brought that to light for our community members to say, we can do better as human beings. And interestingly enough, right after that, some individuals were challenging. I said, we got to do better than that. So we brought in Sheikh Mus'ad from Sakina Collective in light of the Laylat al-Ma'raj. Laylat al-Ma'raj is about reflection, self-awareness, and anchoring yourself and getting to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that was a good reflection on emotional intelligence and self-awareness. The more you're anchored with yourself, the better your relationship is with God Almighty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more you are anchored with yourself, the more you are able to relate to others. So that gives you kind of a perspective of, are you above the line or below the line? And we always want to be obviously above the line and rise above victimization. One of our community members wrote a book, a fiction in the language of miracles. So we worked with the Islamic Center on a public reading. The reason why we did that, because the book had a beautiful message. It's a message of culture, understanding, and acceptance. Interestingly enough, at that meeting, there was an ACLU board member, which we did not know. So she came to us afterward and she said, I love what I see. I love the connection that you guys are making. But since you guys are struggling, do you know that we also offer Know Your Rights workshop? We'd like to offer that to your community. So we're in communication with ACLU, the Charleston chapter, on hosting this, God's willing, in the next couple of months. So on a community level, we've been busy. But then we looked and said, we are a resource to Charleston, West Virginia. 80% of our members are physicians. We went to the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation, and they serve 6 counties, and said, what can we do as Muslim community to better serve the 6 counties? And she said, well, since you are physicians, she pointed us towards Health Right, the clinic in our backyard. They serve 18,000 patients. They are underserved and underprivileged. We ask you if you would volunteer. You can see patients at their clinic, or you can have their patients come to your clinic. We did have a few hands that were raised. We obviously would like more. I think we have about 7 or 8. We're a community of 150 members. They have 300 volunteers, but they still need more, and I think we can do better. There talk about opening our own clinic. Why not have our own clinic? We are in dialogue with some of you on actually setting the foundation for that, and more to come. Others have come and said, what can you do on a state level? And when they said state level, I said Fazl, Feroz, and Ian and I mean, because that's what I love to do, is talk to politicians. And I said, let's bring it on. So we launched an outreach campaign, a political outreach campaign, to meet with every single politician in the state. Why was that important? When we see Trump and we see Carson and the alike speaking about Muslims in that way, yes, I am a Republican, and I'm a proud Republican, but they don't represent the Republican Party. The Republican Party itself said they do not represent us. We don't want our politicians to go on TV and say the same thing about Muslims, and then it's shame on us. Because what are the Muslims who are the neighbors of Trump? Where are the Muslims who are the neighbors of Carson? And they are the neighbors. And Trump did say, in my building, I have Muslims and they are great people. But he still says the garbage that he says. So shame on us if we don't reach out to our politicians. We've met with every single one of them on several occasions, with the exception of McKinley up in Morgantown. To the point where Senator Manchin asked, this is history in the making, Capito and I will meet with you and 25 of spiritual community leaders. Could you set that up? So I worked with Ibtisam and others on setting this up, and we had our Jewish friends there, our Christian friends there, and many other community leaders. And guess who spoke on behalf of the Muslims at that private meeting? It wasn't us, the Muslims. Our community leaders and spiritual leaders actually took the lead in addressing Islamophobia and the refugee crisis. We were the last to speak, proud to say, because they set the foundation for us. To the point where Senator Mansur said, the work that you're doing in the community, I'd like to bring the national media here. Isn't that right, Ibtisam? We're going to hold him accountable for that. And we're actually working on a big event in the future where we will ask him, we're going to hold you responsible for those words. We're rising above the limitations and the victimization and showing that we are just like anybody else. We just happen to be Muslims. On a national level, proud to say, we connect very well, as you know. So the Muslim Public Affairs Council held their, in the DC office, held their leadership summit and invited 50 American Muslim leaders from around the United States, Cafe Al-Fikr being one of them. Met at the White House, and they were discussing solutions to the challenges that American Muslims were facing. What came out of it? An initiative, a community-led initiative to counter violent extremism in the United States, something that is supported by the government, but it's a community-led initiative. To the point where they connected us with Brookings Institute, a think tank, invite us to attend their U.S. Islamic World Forum in Qatar back in June. We were part of a 40-member team to actually develop and further enhance the safe space model that they've initiated on how to counter violent extremism in the United States. It's almost done. The draft is almost complete. And now it's finding the funding for it. And when it does come to fruition, we'd like to bring that to our local community to actually model that, because it's only been modeled now in 2 cities across the United States. Proud to say that Duke, Omid Safi, the director of the Islamic Studies at Duke, he collaborated with us a couple of times and he said, I like the work that you do. The leadership summit that we hold every 2 years, he said, I'd like that to be hosted at Duke, if possible this year. So we met with their business development office back in the fall, and we are in the process of building that foundation. But since it's going to be a Duke, they're asking, will your community attend? And my answer was, I don't know. So I am asking you that when we hold this in September, I'd like your support. This is going to put us on the map. This collaboration, this agreement with Duke will put Charleston on the map. And if we can get few of you to attend, if you're not able to attend, few of you to support or sponsor, that would be fantastic. That would be one part of a legacy that we can certainly leave behind. The next year is going to be even more challenging year. So our theme for next year is to inspire. So we're doing a lot of heavy lifting, but we'd like to inspire you to actually take the lead on some of these initiatives. So what we have in store is that few of our community members have come and asked us to do a number of things. One was drugs. We're not immune to drugs. What can we do to tackle the issue of drugs? The state is, I think, number 1 of drug addiction. So it's obviously in our backyards. Peer pressure is there. So there is a team that is going to be co-led by Mrs. Sha'lan. Where is she? Right here. You don't go by Mrs. Sha'lan, I'm sorry, but you go by something else. I don't know what that is, but we're working with her to have a team of young adults and parents to actually build a workshop of dealing with drugs in our community. So we'd like our young adults and a couple of our community members to also take place in that. Another thing we're working on is a leadership series with Mr. Stephen Smith. It's an interfaith leadership series for about 6 months. Our Jewish friends, our Christian friends, us, maybe 30, 40 people, and every month it will be a different topic. You will build it. You will build the curriculum on what that looks like. So stay tuned, stay tuned for more information on that. Some of you have asked, you said, we get emotional when we respond. We like how the cafe team articulate themselves. Could you do a cafe forum on the art of communication? And we'll be more than happy to do that because I think that's one of our expertise. So that would be a fun workshop that we will do. The Health Right Clinic volunteer will be finalized within a week. We will get that list, we'll submit it to them, and we hope to have an upper of double digit, maybe around 20 or so, from 7 to 10 that we have right now. The rabbi and the imam were chatting on Facebook about Sharia law and the Jewish law. And Ruby suggested this could be a good discussion on a cafe platform because we don't judge and we don't let others judge. So it would be a really healthy discussion if we can have something like that. So this is only what's come up within the last couple of months. Your support is needed in taking on some of these initiatives. Any small role will be more appreciated. Any financial support would be even. By the way, all of what we've said, this is half of what we did. Question: what do you think our budget to hold all of what I've just mentioned, and that's half of it? What do you think our annual budget is?
10 million?
I wish. But for those who do know the answer, do not say, by the way. But what do you think our annual budget is? Give me a number. Be serious.
100,000 I'm missing.
100,000. Give me another number. What do you say? 400,000. Give me a number. 30,000. Give me another number. I can't. I'm sorry? 5,000. So would it surprise you to say that we are lean at a 15,000?
No way, he's lying.
Because I'm the treasurer and the president, so I know what's in the books. So we're talking about 1,000 to 1,500 a month, guys, to do the work that we do. And the reason we do it that way is because we are all volunteers. When we fly on our dime. The events that we do it on our dime. Kirk, who videotapes, we take care of Kirk. I'm going to end with a last reflection. When you go home and you're talking to your wife and talking to your husband and you're reflecting on this evening, I want you to ask 2 questions. What did you say? Write a check? That wasn't one of the questions, but I like it. I like it. But seriously, honestly speaking, if I have your commitment to ask 2 questions, okay, let me say this. Do I have your commitment to ask these 2 questions that I'm going to share with you? I didn't hear you. Yes. The first question: what will our community look like without the cafe team? If the answer is positive, what can I do to help? What's the first question?
What do we look like without cafe?
What does the community look like without the cafe team? What's the second question? What can I do to help? Because I can tell you guys, And honestly speaking, we've been having this conversation the last several months. Sustaining this is difficult. If we don't have the volunteers, if we don't have the financial support, it's difficult. So, to hold you accountable, if you did answer those questions, the next time you see us, just give us the answer. You can email us, you can call us. The next time you see us, we're not in a rush. We're here. We're not going anywhere. We're committed. But own it and hold yourself accountable. If you did ask these two questions and you did answer them, own it and address it with one of our cafe teams. It could be as simple as, I'm coming bringing coffee to your next cafe forum. It could be as simple as, I'm coming and I'm bringing a check for $25. It could be as simple as, I've never been to a cafe forum, I'm going to come. Or, I've been to a cafe forum, but I've never brought a friend. It could be any of the above. But if I have your commitment on that, I will close and wish you all a good night. So I have your commitment. So once again, I want to thank every single one of you. I would like to thank the ambassador and his wife, and I'm sorry that I did not mention her. Rushaida, she is with him. They made the trip from DC. We'd like to take some pictures, so please, those who have gotten awards, and anybody want to take a picture with the ambassador or with any of us, please feel free to do so. And you are free to go, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.